Well, welcome everybody to our last virtual colloquium of the fall 2025 semester. It feels like it shouldn't be, we shouldn't be breathing down the neck of 2026 quite yet, but here we are. My name is Corinne Hinton and I am president of the Veterans Studies Association, and I welcome all of you here to chat with Ellie Morales as she walks us through Project 100,000. Before I introduce Ellie, I'd love to chat a little bit about the Veterans Studies Association in case you are new to this group and new to us. The Veterans Studies Association promotes and publishes rigorous scholarship about issues shaping the diverse experiences of veterans and their families and military-affiliated populations. Our flagship is the Journal of Veteran Studies, which is the only peer-reviewed interdisciplinary open access journal dedicated to publishing work in the area of veteran studies. And I would be remiss if I didn't share with everybody on this call that we're looking forward to our 7th biennial Veterans in Society Conference, which is happening March 26th through 28th at the University of Chicago. So I hope you are making plans to see us in person in Chicago. I know that I am definitely looking forward to it and to seeing many of you there. Let me introduce Professor Ellie Morales. She is an assistant clinical professor of law and the director of the Veterans Legal Clinic. Professor Morales joined the Army Judge Advocate General, the JAG Corps, in 2010 upon graduation from Wake Forest's School of Law. During her time on active duty, she served as a legal assistance attorney, a criminal prosecutor, and an administrative law attorney. Professor Morales also deployed to Kabul, Afghanistan, where she served as an operational law attorney in support of the International Security Assistance Force and U.S. forces. In 2015, Ellie transitioned to the Army Reserves, where she currently serves as an Army Judge Advocate in the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. We welcome Ellie Morales today, who's going to share all about Project 100,000, and I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thank you so much, Corinne. It's so nice and wonderful to be here with you all today. Since my Army background was mentioned, I'll just, give a quick disclaimer because I am a lawyer that all views today, all opinions that I express are mine and mine alone. Of course, don't reflect any of that of the Army or the Department of Defense. So with all that said, a lot of this conversation today, while it's based and founded upon my experience in the military, it's primarily comes from my experience as a law professor at Wake Forest Law School. I'm in my 6th year of teaching, and it is the best job ever. I represent former service members and all different types of legal actions and remedies, along with my students, teaching them how to practice law. Usually my students, it's their first ever client that they get to interact with. So how cool is it that they get to work with former service members? So with all that said, I know it's kind of a smaller group, so I really do welcome a conversation. Please don't be shy about asking questions about what I've learned about Project 100,000. Perhaps some of you, I'm actually curious, has anyone even heard of this program before? I'll be honest, I had not heard of it until, okay, Eric, Ruthie they're saying yes. John, I see a thumbs up. Okay, that's really cool. So I'm in a very educated audience, obviously. So, anything that you all know about the program, any perspective you all have, I'm super curious. Would really, I love doing presentations like this, but I also am a lifelong learner. So I would love to hear what you all know about it as well. But I became aware of this program through several of our clinic clients who I discovered were unknowingly part of Project 100,000. And it got me really interested. I started diving deep into the history of it and learned about and observed personally through our clinic clients the injustices that they experienced even 50 years later. And so I wrote a lengthy law review article about it that I'll share with you at the end if anyone wants to read it. But yeah, let me just jump in. And again, I really do welcome your questions. So let's see if my slides are working. Okay, I think so. So for those of you who have never heard of it, which again, that was me like 6 years ago, this is a military program that was instituted during the Vietnam War. It essentially lasted from about 1966 to 1972. It was implemented at the Department of Defense level, and I'll explain kind of the evolution of it here in a minute and how it got going. But the program basically altered the military aptitude and medical entrance standards for folks who were previously ineligible to serve in the military, making them eligible to serve starting in 1966. Um, the program had mandated quotas for each military branch. Um, Primarily, the Army received most of the folks part of this program, but it did require each branch to accept a certain number of Project 100,000 men. They were also called New Standards men, partly because they were entered in the military under new standards. And I use the term men because, as far as my research showed, it was all men, part of Project 100,000. And it was composed of folks, and I think this is important, who were not only volunteers, but also those who were drafted could have been part of Project 100,000. So let me kind of walk you, that's a very broad level overview, just to orient you and give you a little bit of context of where we're going. But let me orient you now to kind of the evolution of how the program came into being. It really kind of started with a notice of a manpower shortfall. And for those of you who are Vietnam historians, please chime in because I don't pretend to be, but I did learn a lot about it through this process. I am just a lawyer. So anyway, so, in the Johnson administration started expanding the military role in the Vietnam War around 1965. And the war became increasingly unpopular at the same time. Um, at home. And you even had men fleeing the country just to avoid the draft. There were large anti war protests going on at the same time. And exacerbating this manpower shortfall were the fact that the administration was really adverse to getting rid of the draft exemptions, because there were certain exemptions that could help you avoid the draft, and also President Johnson's decision not to activate the reserves. So those two things kind of exacerbated the manpower shortfall. And a little bit prior to this, there was, during the Kennedy administration, a discovery through a task force that he put together before he was assassinated that discovered that 1/3 of all young men in the nation turning 18 years old back in the 1964 time period would be unqualified to serve if they were examined to be inducted into the armed forces. So to put that in actual like numbers, and I'm just looking at a statistic here in my paper, in 1964, that figure totaled about 500,000 young men, with approximately half of these young men ineligible to serve due to medical standards. So there was some sort of like medical condition that prevented them from serving. And then the other half due to an inability to pass the required mental aptitudes test that was in place at the time. It was called, what they used back then, we don't use it now, but was called the Armed Forces Qualification Test, the AFQT, Armed Forces Qualification Test. And basically the objective of that test was to predict a draftee's likelihood of success in the military. And it was composed of like a 100 multiple choice test of both like verbal and mathematical components. And then those scores were based out of 100, and they were converted to a specific percentage based on like the national average. Statutorily, even to this day, so recruits who score less than that 10th percentile threshold are prohibited from serving. But essentially what, and I'm foreshadowing to where I'm going, what the program of Project 100,000 did is it lowered the acceptable score from that test from the 30th percentile down to the 11th percentile, and that varied depending upon the branch of service. It varied upon the time period within that 6-year range the program was implemented, and it varied upon whether or not the recruit had graduated from high school. So I'll give you a clearer picture of who these folks like are, but that's just a foreshadowing. So this kind of hopefully kind of sets the context that there was a manpower shortfall. We were expanding a war effort in Vietnam. Simultaneously, it was increasingly unpopular, so people are not volunteering to serve, which is exacerbated by the fact that President Johnson chose not to activate the reserves, chose to, he did change over time some of the draft exemptions, but a large one, the education deferment, was not changed. And then the discovery that, like I said, about a third of men turning 18 around this time period would not even be eligible to serve based on the enlistment standards. So the idea that the Secretary of Defense had at the time, Secretary Robert McNamara, who I'm sure many of you all have heard of, he came up with this idea called STEP. And STEP stands for the Special Training Enlistment Program. The Department of the Army came up with like the parameters of what this program entailed, but it basically offered voluntarily enlistment for those men who were previously ineligible to serve based on their AFQT scores. So it was completely voluntary. The Army set out like a kind of a training program that was highly specialized for these folks that would give them additional time beyond the standard 8 weeks of basic training. It would give them like 14 weeks of basic training to get them additional reading and writing and math skills that were needed just to be a successful service member. And the history and what I had read is that it had this program and this idea fit quite nicely within President Johnson's, war on poverty, because he was, implemented at the time because it opened up jobs to folks who were previously ineligible. It avoided President Johnson taking the unpopular decision to activate the reserves and revoke draft deferments, particularly for those in college, which was widely unpopular with the middle class. And it reduced the pressure on the draft. So it seemed like a win-win. But Congress said no. And because it all comes down to money, right? So what I read in the legislative history was that it was going to cost about, this is back in like 1964, right? $2,100 more per recruit to implement this program. And so President Johnson's administration asked Congress to appropriate over $16 million to start this program. And Congress said, absolutely not. They disapproved using the funds in this way. Basically, and the quote I've got here is, Congress did not want the military to be in, air quote, the education business. And they actually went another step and specifically forbade any type of funding for a program like this. So this is all leading up to the implementation of Project 100,000. So Secretary McNamara was not pleased. He was a math guy, and so he wanted to figure out a way to make this idea of STEP work, but he knew he could not ask or obtain any additional funding from Congress. So he figured out a workaround to Congress saying no to him about STEP. So after all, I mean, Department of Defense and Secretary McNamara, as the head of that, does have the power to set enlistment standards. And the parameter, there are limitations, like I said, kind of towards the beginning, is that on the Armed Forces qualification test, Congress has prohibited anyone who scores under the 10th percentile from being eligible to serve, but there was wiggle room to go below that 30th percentile. And that's exactly what Secretary McNamara did. So he announced this new program on August 23rd, 1966, and which essentially, like I said, made those ineligible who were previously ineligible to serve based on medical conditions or based on their AFQT score being too low. Now, the difference with the STEP program and what was actually implemented through Project 100,000 is that this was not a completely voluntary program. Almost half of the service members who were part of this program were drafted. And even though there were some folks who were part of this program who entered through the medical condition piece, all of that was voluntary. And it was a very small percentage of the Project 100,000 men. Overwhelmingly, I think the statistic was 95% of Project 100,000 men entered the program through the lowered AFQT score. It was not primarily through the medical condition exceptions. So to paint kind of a picture of a typical Project 100,000 man or New Standards man, it was a person who frankly did not graduate high school and had about a sixth grade reading and mathematical ability, most often scoring around the 15th percentile of the AFQT. Prior to Project 100,000, that service member would not, or that person would not be eligible to serve. But now with this program being implemented, they are not only eligible, but they could also be drafted into the military. And so in terms of like numbers, how many people are we talking about here? The first year of the program, which kicked off October 1st, 1966, there were 40,000 men part of the program. And then the goal was every year thereafter, they would recruit 100,000 each fiscal year through this program, hence the name Project 100,000. Now, as I alluded to earlier, the program ended in 1972 when, frankly, the manpower need for Vietnam started to decline significantly. And so there was no longer the need for this program. So in the 6 years of the program, 354,000 men were either enlisted or drafted through this program. So we're talking pretty big numbers in terms of folks who are part of it. And one thing that I learned through my personal experience teaching and working with Project 100,000 Men is they were never told that they were part of this program. One of the many hardest conversations that we have with our clinic clients is when we do identify through their military personnel file that they are part of the program and telling them that, because oftentimes by identifying them as part of the program, it opens up additional legal arguments that we can make on their behalf to get the legal remedy that they're seeking. But I'm not aware of any Project 100,000. I don't know how they would know unless they were specifically told that they were part of the program. Any questions about that so far? Nope. Okay, I'll just keep going. So what I discovered in my research, and frankly, I did notice throughout my personal experience, is the disproportionate impact of the program. And so what I discovered through the research was that over 40% of these men, New Standards men, were Black, compared to only 9.1% of Black service members serving at the time. So there are disproportionately service members of color. These recruits were overwhelmingly from impoverished and marginalized communities. The majority were from the southern part of the United States, and the majority ended up in the Army. And what I also discovered through a study that I found on this program years after the program ended was that the New Standards men were, once they were entered in the military, whether they were drafted or enlisted voluntarily, they were more likely to be assigned a combat role. So like infantry, field artillery, armor, one of the combat arms branches in the U.S. Army. They were more likely to be deployed to Vietnam than non-New Standards men. They were more likely to be killed or injured in combat while in Vietnam. In fact, I discovered that the fatality rate was 3 times as high than for non-new standards men. And then, really interesting to me as an advocate for these service members, that if they survived the war, they were more harshly punished than their non-new standards men counterparts, resulting in less than honorable discharges. So 2 statistics with regard to that is that the new standards men faced a 61% higher rate of receiving non-judicial punishment. That's like an Article 15, not, serious going through the court-martial process, but 61% higher chance of receiving that. And then their court-martial conviction rate was more than twice as high as non-new standards men. Oh, and then one more statistic for you is that out of the 354,000 men who were part of this program, over half of them, over 180,000, received less than honorable discharges when they left the military. And so I pulled a quote from the article that I wrote that comes from a book that I think summarizes it much better than I could. And if it's okay, I'll read it to you. It's from a book called Chance and Circumstance, The Draft, the War, and the Vietnam Generation by Lawrence Basquier and William Strauss. So bear with me. I'll read you the quote. I thought it was really compelling. I'll be interested if y'all think so too. So this is from the 1978 book I just mentioned. In the opinion of many military leaders, social planners, and liberal critics, Project 100,000 proved to be a failure. While it expanded the wartime power pool, it also required additional resources which the services could not afford. But above all, it was a failure for the recruits themselves. They never got the training that the military service seemed to promise. They were the last to be promoted and the first to be sent to Vietnam. They saw more than their share of combat and got more than their share of bad discharges. Many ended up with greater difficulties in civilian society than when they started. For them, it was an ironic and tragic conclusion to a program that promised special treatment and a brighter future and denied both. And that is in line with what I have observed in my personal clinic experience working with service members who are part of this program. So I'll give you kind of to further paint the picture, an idea or tell you a story about a Project 100,000 client. Now, caveat, this is, a combination, amalgamation of several of my Project 100,000 clients, but I think it still illustrates the kind of more common person who entered the military under this program. So we'll call this person Maurice. And Maurice scored about a 15 on the AFQT. He was drafted in 1969, where previously he would not have been eligible to serve based on that score on the aptitude test. He was immediately assigned after basic training in infantry military occupational specialty, MOS. And after he finished his advanced individual training, he was deployed to Vietnam. He was injured in combat, but thankfully he survived. And when he returned, he experienced symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder due to his combat experiences. Now, as many of you may know, this is, I guess, we'll say 1970. PTSD was not part of the DSM. It was not even a diagnosis until 10 years later. And so, frankly, Maurice did not know what was wrong with him. His command was not aware of what was wrong with him because it wasn't really in the vernacular. It was not even a diagnosis that folks could receive at the time. And so for minor misconduct, including failure to wear his uniform properly, tardiness to a formation, and he had an outburst when interacting with a superior officer, all nonviolent. None of that's criminal in the civilian world. Just a couple of bad days where he's not wearing his uniform properly and has an outburst with his supervisor. He gets discharged from the military for a pattern of misconduct and receives an other than honorable discharge, which is the worst level administrative discharge that one can receive without going to a court martial. So he leaves the military with this other than honorable discharge and a discharge paperwork that states pattern of misconduct. And the cruel irony of what I saw with many of these clients is that their basis of separation was unsuitability for service, which is ironic, right? Because the program they entered under, it was supposed to be for folks who weren't suitable, frankly, to serve in the first place. So it was kind of a cruel irony to leave these service members worse off than if they had never served. And that's been the experience that I've observed from my clinic clients. So because of this other than honorable discharge, he dealt with, he still deals with the consequences 50 years later. It really prohibited him from getting many different types of employment based on this bad discharge. It was not a criminal conviction, of course, but prior or employers want to know about your prior employment. Show them this discharge paperwork. It's not going to be super positively received. And also, he later developed prostate cancer because he was exposed to Agent Orange while having boots on the ground in Vietnam. And that's a service-connected condition to Agent Orange. But because of his other than honorable discharge, he could not get health care at the VA. And so he was not, oh, did I have a question from somebody? No, okay. So I'll go into this more in just a second and give you a quick plug for my clinic and tell you what we do, and it all makes sense why I'm explaining this to you. But because of the way he was discharged, because of his less than honorable discharge, he was not a veteran under the law. He was not able to access those incredible resources at the VA. And so again, just a plug for the Veterans Clinic at Wake Law. This is what we do. We represent former service members who do not have veteran status under the law. And we do this by appealing to the military administrative correction boards, or we go straight to the VA and argue why, with this other than honorable discharge, they're entitled to veteran eligibility right now. So it's a really incredible experience for law students to be able to get to represent service members in this way, because when we go to the military boards and advocate for our clients to have their discharge or reason for their discharge changed, the statutory standard is quite literally injustice. So our students argue, what was unfair about your client's case? Was there a lack of understanding of mental health? Was your client part of Project 100,000? Was there racial discrimination that came up during the processing of their separation? So it's a great learning experience for them, and our clinic clients hopefully get a lot out of it as well, of course. So the significance of veteran status and of these new standards men, over 180,000 of them being left out of veteran eligibility, is that veteran eligibility is the only key to unlocking the door at the VA. You have to start at veteran eligibility, then you can go to the next step of pursuing disability compensation, VA home loan. I mean, frankly, if you don't have veteran eligibility, you're not even getting a military burial. Doesn't matter if you're injured in combat. So it's the baseline foundational standard. I recognize that most folks leave with fully honorable discharges. It's a non-issue for most veterans, but for our clients, for 180,000 Project 100,000 men, it was an issue, or is an issue still. So many of you all may be familiar with this, but in the event you're not, VA benefits are comprehensive and life-changing. They can offer healthcare for service-connected conditions, housing, like I mentioned, the VA home loan. I'm very grateful I get to take advantage of that personally. Disability compensation, which is tax-free money every month for a service-connected condition. Educational benefits like the GI Bill. And as I mentioned, without veteran eligibility, you're not even getting a military burial. So the burial benefits really do matter a lot to many of our clinic clients. And the collateral consequences of not having veteran eligibility expand beyond just being left out of the VA benefit system. As I mentioned in the client earlier, Maurice, he suffered from underemployment because of his bad discharge. He suffered from a mental health condition, PTSD, due to his combat experiences, and he was not able to get health care at the VA because he lacked veteran eligibility. No surprise, if you aren't able to get employed, you may have financial insecurity. Folks with less than honorable discharges statistically have a greater rate of homelessness. They also have there's a correlation between suicidal ideations and those who die by suicide. So we already probably well know in this community that suicide is a problem among the veteran population. Well, it's even more heightened with those who have less than honorable discharges, including the new standards men. And then not to mention the moral injury piece. This is something that comes up time and time again with our clinic clients, not just with the new standards men, but service members who served at any point in history, being told that your service was not honorable, can really impact that individual service member. And so getting that corrected makes a big difference. And I'll send you the last slide. I have a link to the law review article I wrote. I don't know if you'll ever want to read a law review article, but there is a poem at the bottom, which I can read to y'all if you're interested, or you can read it, that one of my clients who was a Project 100,000 man wrote. And I thought it was a really compelling illustration of the moral injury that he experienced being a Vietnam War veteran and being kicked out less than honorably due to minor misconduct that would not have been criminal in the civilian world. Unfortunately, that client passed away about a year and a half ago due to Agent Orange exposure. But 2 weeks before he passed away, we were able to get his discharge changed and get him veteran eligibility. And we told him before he passed, and it was a very emotional event. I think he was very relieved that that had been corrected and got to see that in his lifetime. So I'll share that with y'all if you're interested. But just to kind of sum this up, so in my law review article, I tried to propose a legal remedy. Of course, I understand that legal remedies are not always the answer to solutions out there, but as a lawyer, that's what I often go to. And so the legal remedy I proposed for Project 100,000 men who received these less than honorable discharges, who presumably there's still folks out there because they keep finding me in the clinic. In the clinic, we can keep representing them on a one-by-one basis, but a more systemic, a more like widespread comprehensive remedy that I thought of and proposed in my article is one in which could be implemented at the Department of Defense level. It would just be a memorandum directing the military correction boards to presume that new standards men's discharge was unfair if they can do two things. One, just demonstrate that they were part of Project 100,000. And I go through in my article about how to identify someone who was part of the program. And two, if their record was devoid of any kind of like aggravating circumstances. So, this is a sliding scale, right? So if a service member was separated for attempting to kill somebody else, if there's a victim involved, then that person needs to go through the typical discharge upgrade process and would not be entitled to presumptive discharge relief. But for the client like Maurice, who I was describing, and the client who wrote the poem, who committed minor misconduct, like not wearing their uniform properly and not showing up to work on time, and getting in an argument with a colleague, I think that is a basis for this kind of presumptive discharge relief, that they should get their discharge corrected and get that baseline veteran eligibility. So the goal of that presumptive discharge relief is just to, acknowledge the harm and then injustice, the collateral consequences of this program, hopefully somewhat redress it. I definitely get that this is not a end all be all solution. I'm not really sure if there is one out there, given that the program's over and it's been 50 plus years. But it's an imperfect solution, but one that could potentially remedy one of the collateral consequences of the program that service members who went through it may still be enduring. So I'm curious if others have other ideas of how to remedy this program, but that's just what I came up with. And I think that's all I've got. I would love to kind of engage in a conversation. Any questions? Learn more about what you all know about Project 100,000. There's a link to my law review article there. Happy to share that poem. It's at the end, very, very end of that lengthy article. But it's meaningful to me, at least.
Could you share the poem?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me pull it up here. I'll just bring it. Let me bring it over here. And I can read it to you all. So this is my law review article. Don't make anyone dizzy. Okay, so it's at the very end. So the title of his poem was OTH, other than honorable. Other than honorable is what their discharges say. There will be no 21 gun there will be no 21 gun salutes or flags given to them that day. Young men sent to fight in a war, no one knew the reason why. It would be revealed years later. It was all based on a lie. They returned home despised, no parade or welcome embrace, called vile names, treated with contempt and utter disgrace. Many could not cope. There were no lifelines or helping hands. Native sons treated as pariahs on their native land, sleeping on cold benches as people would dismissively pass them by, in cardboard boxes under bridges, no one there to hear them cry. Drugs and alcohol became their companions to take away their pain. They are still there today, their condition still the same. You forgave those who dodged the draft, yet you treated us as bastard sons. After all the passing of years, all the pain and tears, I cannot wonder if only we had one. Today we are greeted with, thank you for your service, or welcome home. Please go tell that to the others who are brokenhearted and alone. Other than honorable America, you know that isn't true. The ones other than honorable America is you.
Wow.
Curious about any questions or comments you all have.
Hi, Ellie. I'm Annetta
Hi.
Davenport, and I'm really glad that you're addressing this issue. My dissertation focused on the transition of military, and there were a lot of things that I found out in my literature review. And this particular situation, I believe, also happened with post 9/11 veterans. And there were a lot of veterans who were discharged based on personality, quote, personality
Yes.
disorders. I'm also a mental health provider and an EAP, Employee Assistance Program professional. And so I still work with the within the Department of War environment. And also there are a lot of veterans that I serve. And so I believe for the post 9/11 veterans, there was a class action lawsuit in which now the Army is going back and reviewing the diagnoses of the different veterans who were discharged with less than honorable. And so they're going back to reverse. And I'm glad that you mentioned that post-traumatic stress disorder was not a diagnosed condition at that time of the Vietnam War. And then also moral injury is just a recent diagnosis as well, right? And it has to do with different types of impact on that individual. And so I was just wondering if you're aware if there might be a possibility, as it was with the post 9/11 veterans, could there be a process in which the Vietnam era veterans and Vietnam War veterans can go back and have their records as a group re-examined. And even if they have passed away, that their families
Yeah,
get the
absolutely.
benefits entitled to them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I am aware of the class action lawsuit with regard to the personality disorders, and that could be a method that service members part of this program could pursue. And the remedy I proposed, I tried to think of one that would be the easiest, so to speak, in terms of the least amount of lift. And I based it upon how the Secretary or the Department of Defense handled their former discrimination of service members based on their sexual orientation, because up until 2011, service members could be discharged based on their sexual orientation status and receive a less than honorable discharge. And so the way that the Department of Defense, I can't even say remedied, but addressed it on the back end is that they issued a memo to these military correction boards instructing them that if these certain criteria are met, then you have to change this service member's discharge if they were discharged based on their sexual orientation. And if there is no aggravating circumstances, then they must be changed. Now, advocates in our space have said that doesn't go far enough because it's illegal discrimination, and these folks still have evidence of it on their discharge paperwork. And so there has been a lawsuit filed about that to have it just be automatic, where the service member doesn't even have to apply. And I struggled with that because, of course, these service members, these new standardsmen, don't even know they're part of the program. You have to have a lawyer or someone who knows about it to even point it out. So, it's certainly an imperfect solution, but I wonder if there is a way this is a Department of Defense, Department of War kind of issue, if at that level there is a way to address this holistically and just presume that anyone part of this program, perhaps the military sua sponte on their own, I mean, they have access to the personnel records, looks at these files and determines if they're part of the program, you get a new discharge. Now, I know that's perhaps naive and a little bit unrealistic. We're in a government shutdown. They've got a lot of priorities going on. But to answer your question, I think that the class action lawsuit for personality disorders can definitely be informative and like a potential methodology to redress this harm. But the one I proposed was just me trying to think of like the easiest lift to kind of get this done on the most effective basis. But that's definitely a good idea as well. And maybe it's a way to force the hand.
Yeah, and the other thing that I just recently had, concerns about were the recruits that came in during COVID-19. And so I know, just personal stories and other people, when I asked them, a lot of these young people came in after COVID-19 and maybe even older adults because they were displaced, right, in their former employment because of COVID-19. And they did not get the traditional basic training because of the societal precautions that they were taking at that time. And so a lot of these people came into the active duty workforce without a lot of the information that traditional recruits had during basic training. And then starting off at their new duty station, they're already being looked at as, wow, why don't you have this information? It's just normal information, but they didn't receive it, right? So now they're having to explain why they're lacking in some types of knowledge, whatever they are. And then also standards were reduced a couple of years ago for recruits when they didn't have the recruiting numbers, and they have accepted folks who did not have high school diplomas. And so, this is possible, a repeat. I know a lot of people join the military because of, they need an income. They need to make a living and they need to pay the bills, right? And so the military has been a very good place for a lot of people to mature, a lot of people to start a career. and get the benefits they need for education afterwards. So it's a good environment, has helped a lot of different people, but just to be cautious, I think, how do we keep, these things from happening again, when the need legitimately is there to increase our numbers for the armed forces, because we work off of a all volunteer force now.
Right.
And I believe that recruiting conscription goes against our Constitution. I guess that was basically our bottom line, that it goes against our Constitution to conscript people. It has to be a voluntary thing to make it equal for everybody. So I'm glad that you're addressing these things and helping the individuals that you are, because I think it could repeat itself if we're not careful.
Absolutely. I think, we can always look back and learn from our past experiences. And in the article, I definitely don't intend, or in today, say that every single new standards man who, joined had a bad experience. Absolutely not. Many of my clients, even who are part of Project 100,000, even leaving with a less than honorable discharge, we're still really proud of their military service. And personally, I'm a beneficiary of military service too. So it's not always a easy picture to paint. It can be complex even in just that individual. But there were many Project 100,000 men who were successful in the military and went on to serve many years past their initial enlistment contracts. So it's just kind of looking in at a very targeted piece of that pie of the folks who may still be dealing with the consequences later. But I think exactly what you're saying. They did alter the entrance standards, and perhaps there's something to look back and learn from going forward.
Thank you for your thoughts, Annetta. Others with questions or comments?
Hi, I do. Ruthie here. First off, thank you so much for this very, at the risk of using such a cliche term, enlightening talk, but really very important and necessary to present a balanced picture of what military service entails for veterans today. I wanted to share with you something that could be an idea and outside of a legal remedy that's within the higher education setting. When I first heard of Project 100,000, it was from the program manager of our local Veterans Club. I thought it was a good thing. I had no idea of the history, but this talk today helped for me connect the dots of something that I observed happening in our Veterans Day luncheon last year. I'm at St. Martin's University in Washington State, small regional liberal arts college, and there's this group that does quilts for soldiers, and they specifically brought in Vietnam era veterans. And as a community, they were honored, they were recognized, they were given pins, they were quilted by these women. That was so powerful to behold. I had, when I was active duty Army for 20 years, I was a family nurse practitioner, and I had actually, during my time in service there, I worked with a civilian who had been 20-year active duty Army too. Always very easygoing, pleasant. He broke down in tears from just the acknowledgement. And so I think that can be a very powerful way of bringing the legal right, but also the heart and the soul, and really attending to what helps with moral injury, especially in the case of institutional betrayal. So just an idea.
We do something somewhat similar every year. We're coming up on Veterans Day here soon. Not all of our clients want to do this, but for the cases where we prevail and achieve veteran status, we have a Veterans Day ceremony for them. And we, of course, it's totally optional. Some of them, there's too much there, but they opt in, and we have it down here at the law school. My students and I organize it. But it's basically a Veterans Day ceremony honoring their service, because they never got that, whether it was, we have all the way to Korean War, so 70 years ago, to as recently as post 9/11 veterans. And we have the American, we have all the flags and we sing the national anthem, and we have a ceremony where we explain what we do in the clinic, achieving and how they achieve the veteran status. And, with their permission, we share parts of their story that they feel comfortable with. And then they stand up and we hand them a flag that was flown over the US Capitol in their honor. And there's a lot of clapping and tears, and their family members come, and it's really meaningful. And it's my favorite event every year, but I definitely think you're onto something, that the institutional betrayal too is just something so profound, being willing to sacrifice your life for the military and doing the best that you could under the circumstances, but being told it's not good enough. It's really hard to live with. So we're honored to be part of that journey. And the neat thing is, those military correction boards are part of it too. They see these cases and they're empowered to correct it. So it's a win-win in terms of, we can't take back what happened, but in terms of the military itself, looking back at this and saying, okay, yeah, we should fix this.
Yeah.
So it's really powerful. But I love that story, Ruthie.
Thank you so much. And one last just observation from first person anecdotal. During my last 2 years of service, I had issues of PTSD and vicarious traumatization from hearing all of the stories from my patients, service members, who oftentimes I was the first person that they were disclosing not only suicidal ideation, but MST, all sorts of things. As a result, I went into general trauma and women's trauma intensive outpatient programs. I was shocked at the disproportionate representation of service persons of color that were being subjected to other than honorable discharges, just ugly treatment from their units because, they're dirt bags, quote unquote. And I could have easily gone a 20-year career and thought, God, we treat our service members so well. And there's a fuller picture behind that. So I thank you so much for really being able to give a scholar's and a service member's perspective of what this means to our veterans.
Of course.
So thank you.
Thank you. I think John had his hand raised.
Yeah, you got a hand up.
Well, this is actually a good segue from what Ruthie was just saying. Is just yesterday Tuesday I interviewed Jason Higgins about his book, Prisoners After War. I just put the link in the chat. Hopefully it's going to be for New Books Network. Hopefully it'll be up sometime next week. And Project 100,000 plays a very big role in
Really?
parts of the book because it's he really focuses on the intersections between the war on crime, the war on drugs, and then the wars in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. But picking up where Ruthie was saying about how race fits into this, and it was a really big important part of setting up Project 100,000, is this was the same time as think about like the Watts riots and the other civil rights riots and the Moynihan Report and this I don't want to say an understanding, but the way people in Washington talked about young Black men, and
Yes.
they needed strong parental guidance, and they thought that the military was going to do this. So we have like the racist structures in the United States and in the Army, plus these patriarchal values pushing these people into service and into war. And then, and Ellie, yeah, like you're saying, is like, these are crimes, most of them committed, that have no civilian analog. Like
No.
not wearing your clothes right. Yes, okay, in the military, like do push-ups, fix yourself. But to have, non-judicial punishment. And then also the fact that they were often given, well, you can do a court martial and get a dishonorable or sign this right here and we'll get you out of here tomorrow. So So yeah, like I said, I hope like Jason's book is really great. A lot of oral histories, so I'm going to plug it. I really enjoyed reading it.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a great narrative, historical narrative, and then just all the oral histories that he has of these incarcerated veterans. Also, people who set up the original veterans treatment courts.
Mhm.
And just one last thing is like if you don't want to read a full book about prisoners after war, the guy at Lions Led by Donkeys did an episode a couple years ago on Project 100,000.
Really?
A lot more profanity than was probably going to be in a law review article or an academic book. But the guy who does it, he's an Army veteran from Afghanistan, the Afghanistan wars, I think twice, and historian does a great job of talking about military history. And that was one of the early episodes. I think the first year of his podcast. And if you haven't heard of the podcast, it's great. It's a lot of fun. But like I said, the my interview with Jason should be going up on New Books Network sometime next week.
Thank you, John. That's fantastic. I look forward to reading that book and listening to that podcast. That's great. And in the spirit of sharing books, one of the books that was instrumental in kind of like learning about Project 100,000 from not necessarily like a lawyer standpoint, but just like foundationally, and maybe you've heard of the book, is McNamara's Folly by Hamilton Gregory. Wow, it's kind of what you're saying, John, like testimonials, because he was a Vietnam serviceman, Army soldier during the Vietnam War. And he ended up getting kind of lumped in with the New Standardsmen because he was not very good at running. And so he got pushed into like the special training battalion. And he started to have some observations like, wait, what's going on here with this group of service members? So he kind of spent a lifetime thinking about it and talking about it and researching it. Yeah, thank you so much, Corinne, for putting that in the chat. So
Sure. I have a question. I'm glad that Annetta and some others have brought in the moral injury component. Since moral injury was just recently established in the DSM, are you finding that your attorneys in your clinic are now being able to take advantage of new pathways toward reparations for this particular population? Now that that's sort of officially recognized, which in many ways is sort of the official rhetorical and behavioral signal that something is now here that we knew was here, but now it's official.
I think we're on the beginning kind of road of being able to take advantage of it. So the military records correction boards that I've been talking about, where you can actually get your discharge changed based on the statutory standard of injustice. The Department of Defense has given guidance to those boards that they should take into account any kind of mental health condition, including now moral injury that's in the DSM, that was caused by their military service that could explain or mitigate and outweigh the reason or the misconduct for their discharge. So as advocates, if me and my law students can, articulate how does this moral injury diagnosis explain our client's behavior that led to his other than honorable discharge, like, perhaps a lot of times what we end up using is if our client has post-traumatic stress disorder from military sexual trauma, combat experiences, or something else that happens during service, and then they exhibit avoidance behavior by not showing up to work, which is called AWOL in the military, and it's a crime. Then we try to connect those dots that, for example, our client who was sexually assaulted in the military developed post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of that sexual assault, and he or she was avoiding the triggers for that mental health condition, and that explains why she left without permission, which led to her less than honorable discharge. And in those circumstances, that's just one example, but we could put moral injury in that kind of category. That can be a basis for relief, and the boards are really receptive to that. Now, we have not actually had a client yet where we had a moral injury diagnosis. I think all of them experience it. So I don't have any like personal anecdotes of prevailing on that basis. But I think it's going to be, it could definitely, it opens up that door now that it is a diagnosis in the DSM. and it'll be in part educating these board members who are advocating to that this is actually a thing that you need to take into account, and it's in line with the legal avenue and that I described in terms of the relief. So I think there'll be some, it'll be evolving, and we'll have to do some educating of the board members in terms of explaining that it is part of the DSM now. Thank you for that question.
Well, thank you again, Ellie. We are a little bit over time. I just want to thank all of you for being here, and especially thank you, Professor Morales, for a really incredible talk and some wonderful conversation. Yeah, like Eric said, thank you. Very powerful and important. We appreciate you so much. I'm sure, Ellie, you're not against if I share your contact information.
Not at all, please.
And of course, we'll post it in case you missed it on our socials, so folks can come out and watch the recording and be part of this really important conversation. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for your mentorship of your attorneys to continue this good work. We're really, really grateful to have you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.